Welcome and hello to all. We're doing Apple's Core, and this is Team 4, which is Jacqueline Farrow, Jimmy Katari, Pinkas Niznov, and myself, Bob Harrison. We wanted to start off, before we actually get to the case, with the biographies on the two founders. To give you some background on Steve Jobs, he was born February 24th, 1955 in San Francisco, and moved to Silicon Valley in 1961. Something I learned from this case is that his birth parents were both University of Wisconsin graduate students, and they did want to get married, but the girl's father refused to have them get married, so they basically put Steve up for adoption. And he was adopted by Paul and Clara Jobs, and his adoptive father was a machinist, and his sister Patty was also adopted, so it's kind of got an interesting family background I wasn't aware of before. He spent 2 years at Reed College and then left. This seems to be the pattern among entrepreneurs. They seem to try college, it doesn't work, and they go off doing something else that's interesting. He happened, when he was growing up, to have a Hewlett-Packard engineer who lived next door that he spent some time with, and got a taste of like technical and problem solving with electronics. And you see in the picture on the slide that he started Apple in his garage on April 1st, 1976. So it's a true Silicon Valley startup story. Family-wise, his wife Lorene with 3 children, and there was also another child in the mix there. Going on to the second Steve Wozniak. He was born August 11, 1950, also in San Jose, so he's a Silicon Valley product. His parents were Jerry and Margaret, and when you go back to that era, having the father work and the wife be a homemaker was very standard. He happened to be an electrical engineer, so you see that there's technical background for Steve Wozniak as well as Steve Jobs. He was extremely handy. During his youth, he made several electronic devices, a homemade voltmeter, also a ham radio, and also some calculators and games. So from early on, he had a real aptitude, for building products. He didn't like formal education. He ended up dropping out of the University of Colorado, tried again at the University of California, and also dropped out there. He met Steve Jobs in 1971. Both worked on Hewlett-Packard mainframes, so they had a taste of what the larger machines were like. And when he couldn't afford a computer, he decided to build it from his own parts. If you think of Radio Shack in the early days where he could buy different components and assemble, he was able to buy computer components and build his first machine. Personally, his second wife is Candace, and he has 3 children. And now we're going to turn it on to Jacqueline.
Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak were the primary founders of Apple, with many inconsistent supporting board members that forged Apple into the business it is today. Wozniak's goals were disparate than Jobs's concerning his career and Apple. Wozniak desired to remain with HP rather than initiate a business with Jobs. Wozniak had developed a strong view of ethics and an interest in technology, extreme honesty, and extreme ethics, which led to his passion for building circuit boards and eventually fully assembling computers. His business views were somewhat naive, but also generous. Rather than keeping his schematics for his first computer to himself, he disclosed his ideas to the Homebrew Computer Club. Wozniak did not have previous business experience and did not take risks regarding his career or Apple, originally thinking Apple would not have an adequate amount of potential customers. Steve Jobs functioned in the opposite way of Wozniak. He willingly took risks and exhibited the instinctive, impulsive personality of an entrepreneur. He applied these characteristics when initially presenting Wozniak's computer design to local computer store owners and gaining $50,000 for the innovation. While Wozniak was more rigid about adding an additional partner to their business venture, Jobs believed adding more to their team would assist Apple in gathering expertise and business knowledge unbeknownst to the 2 original partners. Although Jobs possessed many beneficial characteristics to Apple, he exhibited many adverse ones. Jobs had behaved in a spiteful way when felt provoked by his partners, taking financial actions without consulting his team. Jobs did not possess a liquid market for his share, thus he sold $1 million of his personal holdings. So does Apple have a good founding team? Apple's founding team is a great example of a work team, where one founder's weaknesses were matched by another founder's strengths. For example, Wozniak lacked a risk-taking personality with Apple, whereas Jobs exemplified a risk-taking personality concerning Apple. When Jobs and Wozniak recruited Ron Wayne, Mike Marcella, and Mike Scott, they possessed expertise Jobs and Wozniak lacked. Ron Wayne had law knowledge but lacked the emotional skills to balance with Steve Jobs. Marcella had knowledge in venture capitalism and had valuable connections. He had also impacted Apple's culture by making marketing more of a priority. Mike Scott had expertise in executive management and chip making. Our team believe Apple had an adequate founding team, but could have been organized in a better way. Combining the perfect team takes time and strategy. Although there were some bumps in the road regarding its founding team, it is apparent due to its immense growth that it was a good enough team to succeed.
Let's discuss what an actual founder is over here. An actual founder would be anyone who identifies an opportunity and exploits the opportunity to make something out of it, which we call as an entrepreneurial spirit. In our case, we personally look at Steve Jobs as the one who not only identified the opportunity but also exploited it. In this case, we would also like to mention that going above and beyond limits to make it happen is a true entrepreneur's quality. For the founding team, for this case being a founding team or a founder, we would like to recommend that Steve Jobs can be recognized as the founder of the company because he not only identified the opportunity wherein he could use Wozniak's skills to build custom-made computers or chip boards or circuit boards and sell them to a huge crowd that was already there out for them. And in case of exploitation, he started a company using Wozniak's skills, and for going above and beyond, he not only persuaded Wozniak to quit his job at HP, but even persuaded the then CEO John Sculley for almost a year to come and join Apple with him. In this case, the other founding members were Ron Wayne, Mike Marcula, but Ron Wayne, as an example, was someone who filled the skill gaps that Jobs and Wozniak were lacking, but he quit after a mere 2 weeks in the company. Mike Marcula, who was a venture capitalist and a marketing guru, to say, even he quit the company after a while because Jobs did not let him stay in the company.
Okay, so the breakout dilemma. Shortly after Jobs left college, he was hired by Atari, and he was presented with the task of developing the game Breakout. He offered Wozniak half of the pay if Wozniak could do it with the least chips possible. After 4 days and nights, somehow, he was able to do it, and Wozniak stated that he was paid half the $700 that they paid Jobs for it. Sometime later, Wozniak was able to meet up with Al Alcorn of Atari, went over to talk to him, and was told the truth that Jobs was paid much more than $700. One source stated that this made Wozniak cry. Wozniak called Jobs his best friend, and he felt extremely linked to him. And Wozniak is someone who goes through extreme honesty and extreme ethics as a person. Put into his shoes, it's understandable why he would just be silent and let it go. Wozniak is not the type of person to create a quarrel despite feeling betrayed by someone who he considered a good friend. Personally, we would bring it up in a calm manner and address the issue as a breach of trust that we do not appreciate and hope will only exist in the past.
To wrap, we wanted to talk about some of the founders' lifetime accomplishments to put some perspective on just how great a company they did build. In regard to Steve Jobs, he did pass away on October 5th of 2011. He was involved with the company as well, when he was healthy on and off, as he was suffering with their various medical conditions, and pancreatic cancer is ultimately what took his life. As far as a lifetime of achievement, he was really the ultimate sales and entrepreneurial driver. The person's going to push make things happen. While Wozniak was, as we've heard described, was the technical genius in the background putting it all together. And he had a varied career. It wasn't like he was with Apple the whole time. He was fired from Apple and then revitalized it in 1997 upon his return. In the meantime, he wasn't idle. He built Pixar in the interim, so if you're familiar with Toy Story, the other animated films coming out of there, that was extreme creativity. So he really never rested. And then he kept going as far as innovations go. The iPhone, introduced in 2007, was a major game changer as far as really a handheld computer and communications device, along with iMac, iPad, and the MacBook Air. And since 2007, the company has done dramatic sales increases. And we look at the introduction in 1997 that this was all going on as he was having health problems. So it really didn't deter his focus and drive, to be building new and innovative products. One thing that he just could not stand was Google's basically taking and duplicating and improving all the iPhone functions. And this was just one of those things that annoys an entrepreneur and inventor, because all the hard work that you invested, imitation is the greatest form of flattery, but it still got him very upset that they took basically his design and functions. Overall, he was not notable, for any public philanthropy like Bill Gates was. He basically said building Apple was his philanthropic project. There are some rumors that he gave some money here and there, but when he did come back to Apple, he basically stopped all the corporate, social giving, things like that, just to make Apple survive. So he leaves a legacy of a company with the highest value on the stock market, and continuing to build up probably one of the largest cash stockpiles in corporate history. Now, if we turn to what's happening with Steve Wozniak as far as his lifetime of achievements, if we look back, he invented the Apple I and Apple II computers in the late 70s. He was granted 4 patents, so he is definitely the author of the intellectual property that started Apple on its way. And he had the cross-functional capability. He sold design hardware, circuit boards, operating systems, which is very unusual because usually a chip designer just does chips. He seemed to be able to, handle software as well as the hardware aspects. The Apple II was the first mass-produced personal computer, and that's what got IBM very concerned, because they saw that whereas their mainframe business was their primary focus, that Apple had now tapped into and established a brand new market. As far as his other technical achievements, Steve Wozniak developed the first programmable universal remote control, and as all guys know, that's one of our most valuable tools at home, and also a wireless GPS. He didn't stay with Apple all that long, did get involved with some other ventures, startups. He retired from Apple in '87, and he's received an ongoing stipend of $120,000 a year since that time. He's founded and been involved in some other startups. He eventually did go back and finish college, which I think was like an open-ended item in his life. And he also authored the book I Was, which kind of gives some of the history. So overall, really an interesting case to take a look at. 2 founders, 2 different personalities, different traits, but together they were able to put down, just an extreme amount of work, effort, technology, and innovation to form an Apple, and it continues to be, even with some sales issues from the last quarter, they're still a very valuable company, very innovative, and one of the stock market's favorites. So thank you.